So let's do a quick revisit of this suspension assembly process. So here on the table I have a couple of suspension parts. These are E90 of my E90 suspension parts. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to revisit the assembly procedure for the suspension parts or suspension components. So I have the rear set up here and I have the front on this part of the table. So not all of these parts are original, some are aftermarket pieces, but the general idea is still the same. I guess the main components are physically the same, or shape wise they are the same. So let's just get to it. So I suppose I can start with the rear and get it out of the way. So on the regular cars with steel lower control arms in the rear, we have these shocks that have mounting pins with threads on both ends. This is the lower mount. This is the upper shaft with the threads. So let's start from the bottom and go all the way up. So the lower shock mount is something like this. Has two bolts. It has two bolts that attach the lower mount to the control arm, and the center is basically just a hole. So the lower mount slides over the shock until it bottoms out. There is an M10 by 1.5 millimeter nut that goes on. Make that tight. And these two bolts, like I said, are holding the mount to the control arm. So that's the bottom. Well, there isn't much to go wrong, except if you over torque this nut, you can snap the bottom of the shock. The threads, the lower bottom part, that happened to me once. Those are, I mean, there isn't much metal, so you have to be careful. So now the upper part of this assembly is a couple of pieces basically. So there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I guess seven pieces in this puzzle. So the dust boot and the bump stop are just things come out apart like so. You just push it back in. The bump stop holder, I guess washer, is just a piece of a metal like this. This thing just basically goes in like so, and it's supposed to be fairly tight. So this slides over. So okay, so this washer has to bottom out against this shoulder on the shaft of the shock. There's a bit of a rust, but it just slides like so. So the next piece of this puzzle, so I guess I kind of prefer to take this sleeve, press it into or push it into the lower part of this upper shock mount, lower part of the upper shock mount, which is, well, this was experimental part, so it was cut shorter. So now this lower part with a sleeve slides over and bottoms and sits against this washer. So now there is this dust boot. This actually goes over the lower part of the upper mount like so. And the next thing that you have to do is actually take this thingy and install in the car. Once that's installed from the inside of the trunk, this is a one-piece assembly if it's a standard, I guess, part, not aftermarket solution with separate nut. So in this case, this rubber upper shock mount is glued onto this washer, and this washer has tabs that hold the nut in place. This nut is special. I think it's I believe it's M10 by 1.0. That's M10 by 1.0 fine thread. So these nuts are special. They are not the same as the bottom ones. Those are 1.5 thread pitch, so those will not fit on the top. The top nut will not fit on the bottom. So once this is all in the car, from the inside of the trunk, you just screw this on all the way until it all sandwiches together, and I guess you just make it tight. You are actually supposed to bottom out this washer against the sleeve. So in a nutshell, in essence, this sleeve has to bottom out against this washer on the inside, and then when it slides out, slides over and gets tight, that sleeve sits against this washer. So that's the way this part is assembled. There's nothing else really about it, just like so. But like I was saying, it's a little bit weird the way it is assembled, that you have to put this lower part on first, have to put this dust boot over, and then install this into the car. That's all as far as the rear shock goes. So now, as far as the front strut assembly goes, there is quite a few parts that you have to put together. So these are not 100% OEM parts, these are some aftermarket and such. So I guess I will start with the strut. There is nothing special about it except for that, for this thing, which is the lower spring seat. That is a piece of rubber, has a couple of alignment pins, I guess, and this tab that lines this up with the strut. So this just lines up like so. And naturally the next thing that goes over it is the spring. So this is, well, this will not fit because this is not the exact spring that is supposed to be used with this assembly. But in any case, this is the spring. So the lower part of the spring is smaller diameter, the upper is bigger naturally. So that gets on, and then you assemble the top hat and everything. Except for one thing, if you have an OEM spring, it's going to be fairly long, and you have to compress it and deal with the spring compressor and such. If it's aftermarket lower in spring, it's doesn't usually require much of a compression to be assembled. The next thing that you can do, you can put the bump stop with the dust boot on, and these are just also junk parts, and this has been cut for a reason. So this just goes on like so, and that's pretty much, let's see. So basically the bump stop sort of well, I guess doesn't really matter. It doesn't get attached to the upper spring seat, I guess. Just, well, I guess the friction over the strut is just going to hold it in place. So naturally you have the spring going. The next is the spring upper seat. It also has a rubber insulator or isolator. So that lines up with the spring also. There is a place where it lines up. So that has to be really lined up. You cannot assemble it any other way. I mean, you could, but you would have issues and problems. That's what people do. Occasionally they don't assemble it correctly, and then they have problems. So this upper coil of the spring has to sit against this step in the rubber insulator. And actually the same deal is with the bottom, because there is a sort of a stop in this rubber seat. So you have to mind that. There is a taper here, and there is a taper on the strut, so that bottoms out all the way, and it has to be bottomed out. You cannot really make it or leave it loose or have any gaps or anything. The next thing that actually confuses a lot of people is this washer. This is not a flat washer, it's a steel and has a sort of a black ring on one side and has a taper to it. This washer has only one way that it can go over the upper spring seat, and it always goes with the black painted ring. I guess that always goes to the top, so it does not sit this way. It has to be assembled this way. If not properly installed, it's going to create issues because the upper strut hat would actually be in contact with the washer. It's going to rub and make it, well, it will just not work basically. So it has to, this ring of this washer has to sit against the strut hat, and that's the only way this works. There is a dust washer or a dust cover that I actually just forgot to put on my car. In any case, there is a bearing inside of the hat. So this dust cover, basically just dust cover that holds the dirt or keeps the dirt away and such. It's not an exact seal, but it's just I guess an extra protection, or at least that's what they think it is. So this is installed over the bearing, and naturally, let's just do it. So this goes over like so, this washer goes over like so, this goes over like so. The next thing to do is basically, so you may have two types of knots. You may have just a regular knot without any nylon or any other type of a locking. Those are usually used with a lock washer like so, like split spring lock washer. If it's a different knot with a nylon, those don't use any lock washers because it's just redundant, I guess. So if it's a regular knot, just put a lock washer over and then put the knot on and just basically make it all tight. So you can just I think this is 21, but in a nutshell, just take a socket and an impact wrench, I guess, an impact wrench, that kind of helps. And I'm sure there is a proper torque to this knot, but it doesn't have to be too tight, but it has to be fairly tight, not loose. So once everything is tight, the upper spring seat is going to be tight against the strut, but no matter what that knot is torqued to, the strut hat is actually supposed to be rotating freely. So if it's not turning or spinning, then you have a problem and you have to revisit your parts, check them for damage and the proper sequence of positioning and orientation, rotation and such. So like I said, this has to turn. If you have a, come on, no, this is 21. So if you have an XI model, there's a bit of a difference with the part numbers and the strut size, and the upper hat is also a little bit different configuration. Well, it does have in original shape studs, and just press them out, but that goes over the same way. So there is no difference, it's just a different size and shape. And then I guess two last things is this paper type of washer that goes over this. That thing goes on, and the last thing is this cap that basically just gets installed over this. And that's pretty much it. Just a plastic. And yep, that's pretty much it. There is nothing else to it. The spring should be actually in place like so. And now it's ready to be installed in the car. Well, that's pretty much it. There is nothing else to this. Fairly easy. No magic is needed, except for the spring compressor and such. I don't find those springs to be safe to work with. Well, this can be safe if you use proper equipment. If you are in a garage and don't have proper equipment, that can be dangerous and it can hurt you. So take all the precautions that you need. Be careful and always protect your eyes in first place. The rest can be fixed. Eyes cannot be fixed. Well, yeah, that's the end of this episode.